Step into the art of Poirot, where Agatha Christie's Hercule Poirot masters the craft of mystery.
In the snowbound shadows of Dunhaven Hall, a scream pierces the night. Sylvia Tremaine lies dead, a silver letter opener in her heart. Who among the elegant guests, each hiding motives of greed, betrayal, or shame, wielded the fatal blow? Was it the charming rogue, the jealous wife, or the silent solicitor clutching his secrets? Hercule Poirot, with his little grey cells, unravels a web of lies, a hidden will, and a scandal buried in the past. Can you guess the killer before the final, shocking twist? Dive into this classic mystery, where every clue counts, and no one is what they seem. Chapter 1. The Gathering Storm. The snow fell in a relentless cascade, cloaking the Yorkshire moors in a shroud of white that muffled sound and blurred the edges of the world. Dunhaven Hall, a grand but weathered estate nestled in a remote valley, stood resolute against the storm, its mullioned windows glowing like beacons in the gathering dusk. The house, a labyrinth of stone and oak, had been the seat of the Ashbourne family for generations, and tonight it played host to a gathering that promised both festivity and friction. Captain Arthur Hastings, ever the loyal friend and chronicler of Hercule Poirot's exploits, adjusted his scarf against the chill as he stepped from the hired motor car onto the gravel drive. The invitation to Dunhaven Hall had come unexpectedly, penned in the elegant hand of Lady Eleanor Ashbourne, widow of the late Sir Reginald Ashbourne. A Christmas gathering, the letter had promised, to mend old wounds and forge new bonds. Hastings, ever susceptible to the romance of a country house at Christmas, had accepted with alacrity, though he suspected the true purpose was less sentimental. Inside, the great hall was a study in opulence tempered by decay. The oak-panelled walls gleamed under the light of a massive chandelier, but the air carried the faint mustiness of a house too large for its diminished staff. A roaring fire cast flickering shadows across a gathering of guests, each sipping sherry or warming their hands, their voices a low hum of polite conversation laced with unspoken tensions. Lady Eleanor, a tall woman of 60 with silver hair and an imperious air, presided over the assembly with the grace of a queen in exile. Her sharp grey eyes missed nothing, though her smile was practised and warm. "Captain Hastings," she greeted, extending a gloved hand. "How kind of you to brave the storm. I trust your journey was not too arduous." "Not at all, Lady Ashbourne," Hastings replied, bowing slightly. "Though I confess, the snow made the final miles rather perilous." "You are a stalwart soul," she said, her tone carrying a hint of amusement. "Come, let me introduce you to our little circle." The guests were an eclectic group, each a thread in the tapestry of the Ashbourne legacy. There was Julian Ashbourne, Lady Eleanor's nephew, a lean man of 35 with a restless energy and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He stood by the fire, one hand in his pocket, the other clutching a glass of whisky. His wife Clara, a delicate beauty with auburn hair and a nervous laugh, hovered nearby, her gaze darting between her husband and the others. Next was Dr. Victor Hargreaves, a retired physician and old friend of the late Sir Reginald. His round face and genial manner belied a sharp intellect, and his habit of polishing his spectacles gave him an air of perpetual distraction. Beside him stood Miss Beatrice Langley, a distant cousin of the Ashbournes, whose prim demeanour and severe black dress suggested a woman more comfortable with ledgers than laughter. The younger set included Rupert Carstairs, a rakish young man with a penchant for fast cars and faster debts, who was said to be a ward of Lady Eleanor's late husband. His easy charm was tempered by a certain slyness, and he lounged against a bookcase, exchanging barbed pleasantries with Sylvia Tremaine, a glamorous actress whose presence in the house seemed to puzzle everyone but Lady Eleanor. Finally, there was Mr. Ernest Whitlock, a solicitor with a pinched face and a briefcase that seemed an extension of his person. He had arrived that morning, ostensibly to discuss estate matters, though his guarded manner suggested other business afoot. Dinner was announced, and the party moved to the dining room, where a long mahogany table gleamed under candlelight. The meal was lavish: roast pheasant, creamed potatoes, and a claret of impeccable vintage, but the conversation was stilted, punctuated by awkward silences. Hastings, seated between Clara and Beatrice, noted the undercurrents: Julian's sharp retorts to Rupert's jests, Sylvia's flirtatious glances at Dr. Hargreaves, and Lady Eleanor's watchful gaze, as if she were a chess master awaiting an opponent's blunder. As the dessert course was served, a distant howl of wind rattled the windows, and Clara shivered. "This storm feels like an omen," she murmured, her voice barely audible. "Nonsense, my dear," Julian said, though his tone lacked conviction. "It's merely winter asserting itself." Beatrice, cutting her pudding with precision, remarked, "Dunhaven has seen worse storms." "And worse secrets." The table fell silent, and Hastings felt a prickle of unease. Lady Eleanor's smile tightened, but she raised her glass. "To family," she said, "and to truths that bind us." The toast was echoed, but the words hung heavy in the air. Hastings, ever attuned to the mood of a room, sensed that Dunhaven Hall was a powder keg, and the spark was yet to come. As the party dispersed to the drawing-room, Hastings lingered, observing the way Julian's hand lingered on Clara's arm, the way Rupert's eyes followed Sylvia, and the way Whitlock's briefcase never left his side. The clock struck 10, its chimes echoing through the house like a warning. Outside, the snow continued to fall, sealing Dunhaven Hall from the world. Inside, the stage was set for a drama that would demand all of Hercule Poirot's little grey cells to unravel. Chapter 2. The Shadow Falls. The storm had grown fiercer by midnight, its howls weaving through the corridors of Dunhaven Hall like the cries of restless spirits. The guests had retired to their rooms, their polite farewells tinged with the strain of the evening's uneasy exchanges. Captain Hastings, however, found sleep elusive. The weight of the house's atmosphere pressed upon him, and he lay awake, listening to the wind and replaying the dinner's subtle tensions in his mind. At 1:30, a scream shattered the silence, a high, piercing cry that seemed to come from the east wing. Hastings bolted upright, his heart pounding. He fumbled for his dressing gown, grabbed the small torch from his bedside table, and stepped into the darkened hallway. The air was cold, the floorboards creaking underfoot as he moved toward the source of the sound. Others had been roused as well. Lady Eleanor, her silver hair loose about her shoulders, emerged from her room in a velvet robe, her face pale but composed. Julian Ashbourne appeared, his shirt untucked, a revolver in hand that gleamed ominously in the torchlight. Clara clung to his arm, her eyes wide with fear. Dr. Hargreaves, still in his dinner jacket, hurried from the opposite direction, his spectacles askew. "What in heaven's name was that?" Hargreaves demanded, his voice unsteady. "It came from Sylvia's room," Clara whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm sure of it." The group hastened to the east wing, where Sylvia Tremaine's door stood slightly ajar. Rupert Carstairs was already there, his face flushed, his usual nonchalance replaced by a grim intensity. He pushed the door open, revealing a scene that froze them all in place. Sylvia Tremaine lay sprawled across the floor, her silk nightgown stained with a dark, spreading pool of blood. A silver letter opener, its handle engraved with the Ashbourne crest, protruded from her chest. Her eyes, wide and unseeing, stared at the ceiling, and her golden hair fanned out like a halo. The room was in disarray. A chair overturned, a glass of water spilled on the rug, and a window cracked open, letting in a gust of snow-laden air. "Good Lord!" Hastings muttered, his stomach turning. He stepped forward, careful not to disturb the scene, and checked for a pulse, though he knew it was futile. "She's dead." Lady Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth, but her eyes remained sharp, scanning the room. "We must not touch anything," she said, her voice steady despite the horror. "Julian, fetch Mr. Whitlock. He'll know what to do." Julian hesitated, his grip tightening on the revolver, but he nodded and disappeared down the hall. Dr. Hargreaves knelt beside Sylvia's body, his medical instincts overriding his shock. "The wound is precise," he murmured, almost to himself. "Straight to the heart." "She would have died instantly," Rupert, leaning against the doorframe, ran a hand through his hair. "Who could have done this?" he asked, his voice hoarse. She was fine at dinner, laughing, charming everyone." Clara sobbed softly, and Hastings noted the way her fingers twisted in her shawl. Beatrice Langley appeared then, her face ashen but her expression unreadable. "This is monstrous," she said quietly. "Sylvia had her faults, but this—" The group stood in stunned silence, the wind whistling through the open window. Hastings's mind raced, cataloguing details. The letter opener, an Ashbourne heirloom. The window, barely open but enough to let in the cold. The spilled water suggesting a struggle. He glanced at the bedside clock, which read 1:37 a.m. The scream had come at 1:30, meaning the killer had acted swiftly and fled, or was still among them. Mr. Whitlock arrived, his briefcase in hand, his thin lips set in a grim line. "This is a matter for the police," he said, his tone clipped. "But with the storm, they won't reach us until morning, at the earliest." Lady Eleanor nodded. "Then we must secure the room and wait. No one is to leave the house." Hastings, his thoughts turning to his old friend, said, "Lady Eleanor, if I may make a suggestion, I know a man who could help. Hercule Poirot, the detective. He's staying at a hotel in York, not far from here. If we could get a message to him—" "Poirot?" Julian interrupted, his brow furrowing. "The Belgian fellow. What good is a detective in a blizzard?" "He is the finest mind I know," Hastings said firmly. "If anyone can make sense of this, it's him." Lady Eleanor considered this, her gaze flickering to Sylvia's body. "Very well," she said at last. "Send for him, Captain. But until he arrives, we must keep this tragedy contained." As the group dispersed to their rooms, under strict instructions to remain there, Hastings lingered in the hallway, his torch casting long shadows. He noted the muddy footprints near the staircase, faint but distinct, leading toward the servants' quarters. He also recalled Sylvia's flirtatious demeanour at dinner, particularly with Dr. Hargreaves and Rupert, and the way Julian's jaw had tightened each time she laughed. The house settled into an uneasy quiet, broken only by the storm's relentless howl. Hastings returned to his room, drafting a telegram to Poirot with a sense of urgency. Sylvia Tremaine's death was no random act, he was certain. The killer was among them, hidden in plain sight, and only Poirot's meticulous logic could unmask them. As he sealed the telegram, A chill ran through him, not from the cold, but from the realization that Dunhaven Hall was now a prison, its secrets locked in with the living and the dead. Chapter 3. The Arrival of Poirot. The storm had not relented by morning, but a faint light crept through the heavy clouds, casting Dunhaven Hall in a pallor that seemed to deepen its gloom. The house was subdued, its occupants moving with the cautious tread of those who know death lingers nearby. Breakfast was a sombre affair, served in the dining room under the watchful eye of Lady Eleanor, who maintained an air of unshakable dignity despite the tragedy. The guests spoke little, their eyes darting to the empty chair where Sylvia Tremaine had sat the previous evening. Captain Hastings, nursing a cup of tea, felt the weight of the night's events. His telegram to Hercule Poirot had been sent at dawn via the estate's sole remaining stable hand, who had braved the snow to reach the nearest village. Hastings could only hope the message would find Poirot in York, and that the detective's curiosity would outweigh the inconvenience of the journey. At precisely 10:30, a sharp rap at the front door cut through the oppressive silence. The butler, an elderly man named Grayson, shuffled to answer it, and moments later a familiar figure stepped into the great hall. Hercule Poirot, diminutive yet commanding, stood wrapped in a heavy overcoat, his patent leather shoes improbably spotless despite the snow. His moustache, meticulously waxed, gleamed under the chandelier, and his keen green eyes surveyed the room with the precision of a watchmaker. "Hastings, mon ami!" Poirot exclaimed, his voice warm but tinged with reproach. "You summon Poirot to this frozen wilderness with tales of murder?" "It is not, I think, the Christmas holiday I had envisioned Hastings rose, relief flooding him. Poirot, thank heaven you're here. It's a dreadful business, a young woman stabbed in her room last night." Poirot's expression sharpened, his eyes narrowing. "Stabbed, you say? Most intriguing. And the police, they are detained by this tempered abominable?" "Yes," Hastings replied. "The roads are impassable. We're cut off until the storm clears." "Eh bien," Poirot said, removing his gloves with deliberate care. "Then it is for Hercule Poirot to bring order to this chaos. Introduce me, if you please, to the dramatis personae Lady Eleanor, who had approached during their exchange, inclined her head. Monsieur Poirot, I am Lady Eleanor Ashbourne. Your reputation precedes you. We are in dire need of your talents." Poirot bowed, his manner impeccable. "Madam, I am at your service. Pray, lead me to the scene of this unfortunate event." The group proceeded to Sylvia Tremaine's room, which had been locked since the discovery of her body. Grayson produced the key, and Poirot entered, his movements methodical as he surveyed the scene. The room remained as it had been. Sylvia's body covered with a sheet, the letter opener removed by Dr. Hargreaves for examination, the overturned chair, the spilled water, and the window still slightly ajar. Poirot's gaze lingered on each detail, his head tilting as if listening to a silent conversation. "Tell me, Hastings," Poirot said, crouching to examine the rug, "what was the precise time of the scream?" 1:30 a.m., Hastings replied. "I checked my watch." "And the clock here," Poirot gestured to the bedside table. "It reads 1:37. Most curious." He moved to the window, inspecting the latch. "This window, it was open when you found her?" "Yes," Hastings confirmed. "Just a crack, but enough to let in the cold." Poirot's fingers traced the window frame, then paused at a faint smudge on the sill. "A mark, perhaps, of a glove. Or mud, oui? The snow outside is undisturbed, but this—" He straightened, his eyes gleaming. "We shall see." Turning to Lady Eleanor, He asked who was the last to see Mademoiselle Tremaine alive. Lady Eleanor hesitated, then said, "We all parted after dinner, around 10. Sylvia retired early, claiming a headache. Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. And this letter opener, it is an heirloom, n'est-ce pas? Who had access to it? It was kept in the library, Lady Eleanor replied. Anyone in the house could have taken it. Bon. Poirot clapped his hands. I shall require a room for my inquiries, and I must speak with each of you in turn. No one is to leave Dunhaven Hall until I have completed my observations. The guests gathered in the doorway exchanged uneasy glances. Julian Ashbourne's jaw tightened, and Clara's hands twisted in her shawl. Rupert Carstairs, leaning against the wall, forced a smile, while Dr. Hargreaves polished his spectacles furiously. Beatrice Langley stood rigid, her lips pressed thin, and Mr. Whitlock clutched his briefcase as if it were a lifeline. As the group dispersed, Poirot pulled Hastings aside. Mon cher Hastings, you have a knack for finding trouble, do you not? This house, it is a nest of secrets. The letter opener, the window, the time, these are the threads, and I, Poirot, shall weave them into truth. Hastings, accustomed to Poirot's flair, nodded. Where will you begin? With the human heart, Poirot said softly, for it is there that all murders begin. Now fetch me a plan of the house, and let us see who was where at 1:30 last night. As Hastings hurried to comply, he felt a familiar thrill. Poirot was in his element, and the gears of his little grey cells were already turning. Dunhaven Hall, with its locked doors and hidden motives, was about to yield its secrets to the greatest detective of them all. Chapter 4. The Questions Begin. The library of Dunhaven Hall, with its towering bookshelves and heavy velvet curtains, became Hercule Poirot's temporary headquarters. A fire crackled in the grate, casting a warm glow over the leather-bound volumes and the polished oak table where Poirot sat, a notebook open before him. His pen moved with precision, jotting down observations in his neat, angular script. Captain Hastings, seated nearby, marvelled at the detective's calm amidst the storm, both the blizzard outside and the turmoil within the house. Poirot had requested a plan of Dunhaven Hall, which Grayson, the butler, had provided. A detailed map showing the sprawling layout of the estate, with its maze of corridors, staircases, and rooms. Sylvia Tremaine's chamber in the east wing was marked, as were the bedrooms of the other guests, each annotated with their occupants' names. Poirot studied the map with the intensity of a general planning a campaign, his finger tracing paths from the library to the east wing. "It is the order, Hastings," Poirot murmured, tapping the map. "The order of the house, the order of the night. Everything must be precise." He had arranged to interview each guest individually, beginning with Lady Eleanor Ashbourne. She entered the library at precisely 11 o'clock, her posture regal, but her eyes betraying a flicker of strain. Poirot rose, bowing slightly. "Madame, I thank you for your cooperation. Please be seated." Lady Eleanor settled into a chair, her hands folded in her lap. "Ask what you must, Monsieur Poirot." "I wish this dreadful matter resolved." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Bon, let us begin with the evening. You say Mademoiselle Tremaine retired at 10 claiming a headache. Did you see her after dinner?" "No," Lady Eleanor replied. "I remained in the drawing-room until 10:30, then retired to my room. I heard nothing until the scream and your room. It is in the west wing, oui?" Poirot glanced at the map. "Some distance from Mademoiselle Tremaine's." yet you were among the first to arrive at her door. I am a light sleeper, Lady Eleanor said, her tone crisp. The scream woke me, and I came at once. Poirot nodded, making a note. The letter opener, madame. It was taken from this very library. When did you last see it? Lady Eleanor frowned. Yesterday afternoon, I believe. It was on the desk, where it always is. I cannot say who might have taken it. Very well, Poirot said, his voice smooth. One final question. Mademoiselle Tremaine, she was a guest of some controversy, no? Why was she invited? Lady Eleanor's lips tightened. Sylvia was a friend of my late husband's. I thought her presence might enliven the gathering. I see now it was a miscalculation. Poirot dismissed her with a courteous nod, and she left, her footsteps echoing in the hall. Next came Julian Ashbourne, his lean frame tense, his eyes wary. He sat heavily, his fingers drumming on the armrest. Monsieur Ashbourne, Poirot began, where were you at 1:30 this morning? In my room, with Clara, Julian said quickly. We retired after dinner. I was asleep until the scream woke us. Poirot tilted his head. You carry a revolver, I observe. You had it last night. Why? Julian flushed. This is an old house, full of creaks and shadows. I keep it for protection, and yet, Poirot said, you did not use it when you heard the scream. You ran to danger, unarmed. Julian's jaw clenched. I grabbed it in haste. Didn't think to check if it was loaded. Poirot made another note, his expression unreadable. Mademoiselle Tremaine, she was friendly with you, perhaps. Julian's eyes flashed. If you're implying anything improper, you're mistaken. Sylvia was a flirt, nothing more. Clara can vouch for me. Poirot dismissed him, and the interviews continued. Clara Ashbourne, pale and trembling, confirmed Julian's alibi but seemed distracted, her eyes darting to the door. Dr. Hargreaves admitted to a brief conversation with Sylvia in the drawing-room after dinner, discussing her supposed headache, but insisted he retired by 11. Beatrice Langley claimed to have been reading in her room, alone, and heard nothing until the scream. Rupert Carstairs, with a forced grin, said he'd been in his room, nursing a whiskey in my thoughts, and denied any closeness with Sylvia, though his eyes flickered when her name was mentioned. Mr. Whitlock, the solicitor, was the last to be questioned. His answers were curt, his manner guarded. I was in my room, working on papers, he said. I heard the scream and came at once. And your briefcase, Poirot said, gesturing to the ever-present case. It contains these papers, May I see them? Whitlock's grip tightened. They are confidential, Monsieur Poirot. Estate matters. Poirot smiled thinly. Of course, for now. As Whitlock left, Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. Hastings, what do you make of these alibis? They all claim to have been in their rooms, Hastings said, frowning. But someone's lying. The letter opener didn't walk to Sylvia's room on its own. Précisément, Poirot said. And the window, the smudge, the spilled water, these are not accidents. There is a pattern, mon ami, but it is not yet clear. We must look closer at the little details. He rose, adjusting his tie with meticulous care. Come, Hastings, let us revisit the scene of the crime. The room, it has more to tell us. As they left the library, Hastings noticed Poirot's gaze linger on the desk where the letter opener had rested. The detective's little grey cells were at work, and Hastings knew that no secret in Dunhaven Hall would remain hidden for long. Chapter 5. The red herrings, the morning light, filtered through the snow-heavy clouds, did little to dispel the oppressive atmosphere of Dunhaven Hall. The guests, confined by the storm, and the shadow of Sylvia Tremane's murder moved about the house like actors in a play, their every gesture scrutinized by Hercule Poirot's watchful eyes. Captain Hastings, trailing his friend as they returned to Sylvia's room, felt the weight of suspicion settling over the household like a fog. Poirot had insisted on re-examining the crime scene, his belief in the importance of detail unshaken. The east wing was silent, save for the occasional creak of the old house settling under the snow's burden. Sylvia's room remained untouched, preserved as Poirot had ordered, the sheet over her body a stark reminder of the violence that had shattered the night. Poirot stood in the centre of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his head tilted as if listening to the walls. "Hastings," he said, his voice low, "observe the chair, overturned, yet the rug beneath it is undisturbed. Curious, no?" Hastings frowned, peering at the chair. "It suggests the struggle was staged, perhaps." "Précisément," Poirot replied. "A struggle implies chaos, yet this room is too orderly." The spilled water, the open window, these are distractions meant to mislead. He moved to the bedside table, where the clock still read 1:37 a.m. "This clock, it is electric, oui? It does not wind down. Yet it stopped at the moment of the scream or shortly after. Why? Perhaps it was knocked during the attack," Hastings suggested. Poirot shook his head. "No, mon ami. The table is steady, the clock unmoved. This stopping, it is deliberate, a clue or a deception." Their inspection was interrupted by the arrival of Grayson, the butler, who carried a tray of tea with trembling hands. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice quavering, "the local constable has telephoned. The roads are still blocked, but he hopes to reach us by evening bon," Poirot said, though his tone suggested little reliance on the constable's arrival. "And you, Monsieur Grayson, where were you at 1:30 last night?" Grayson blinked, his lined face paling. "In the servants' quarters, sir." "I was asleep. The scream woke me, and I followed the others to Miss Tremane's room." Poirot nodded, dismissing him with a wave. As Grayson left, Hastings whispered, "Do you suspect him, Poirot?" "He's just a butler." "No one is just anything, Hastings," Poirot said sharply. "In a house of secrets, every soul has a motive." But for now, let us consider the obvious. The obvious emerged soon after, when Rupert Carstairs was summoned to the library for a second interview. The young man's easy charm had frayed, his eyes red-rimmed, his hands unsteady. Poirot, seated at the oak table, fixed him with a piercing gaze. "Monsieur Carstairs," Poirot began, "you claimed last night you were alone, nursing a whisky. Yet I have learned from Grayson that a glass was found in Mademoiselle Tremane's room, bearing traces of whisky. Not water, as we first assumed." Rupert's face drained of colour. I don't know what you mean. I wasn't in her room." "And yet," Poirot continued, "Miss Langley overheard you and Mademoiselle Tremaine in the drawing-room after dinner, speaking in low tones, sweets. She described your manner as intimate." Rupert laughed, a hollow sound. "Beatrice is a nosy old spinster. Sylvia and I were just talking. She was an actress, you know, always playing a part. I didn't kill her." Poirot leaned forward, his voice soft but relentless. "Then explain, monsieur. The cigarette case found under Mademoiselle Tremaine's bed, engraved with your initials, R.R.C. The room seemed to grow colder. Hastings, standing by the fire, felt a jolt of surprise. Rupert's mouth opened, then closed, his bravado crumbling. I must have dropped it earlier. I visited her room yesterday afternoon just to chat." Nothing more. Poirot's moustache twitched. "A chat at such an hour? You will forgive me, monsieur, if I find this unconvincing." Rupert was dismissed, his departure marked by a sullen silence. Hastings turned to Poirot. "He's in deep, isn't he?" The cigarette case, the whiskey glass, it all points to him. Poirot sighed, closing his notebook. "It points too clearly, Hastings." The cigarette case, so conveniently placed, the glass, so obviously marked. These are the red herrings, meant to distract from the truth. The killer wishes us to look at Monsieur Carstairs, but Poirot, he looks elsewhere. "Who then?" Hastings asked, frustrated. "Everyone has an alibi, more or less." "Alibis," Poirot said, rising, "are like mirrors. They reflect what we wish to see. But break the mirror, and the truth lies in the shards. Come, let us speak with Mademoiselle Langley again. Her ears, they hear much, and her tongue, it may yet slip." As they left the library, Hastings glanced at the house plan, noting the proximity of Rupert's room to Sylvia's. The evidence against Rupert was mounting, yet Poirot's scepticism gnawed at him. The detective's little grey cells were sifting through the lies, and Hastings knew that the true killer, whoever they were, was about to face a formidable adversary. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The snow continued its relentless assault on Dunhaven Hall, blanketing the estate in an eerie silence that seemed to amplify the tension within its walls. Hercule Poirot, undeterred by the mounting suspicions against Rupert Carstairs, turned his attention to the subtler details of the crime, convinced that the truth lay not in the obvious but in the overlooked. Captain Hastings followed him through the chilly corridors, his mind buzzing with the contradictions of the case. Poirot had requested to meet Beatrice Langley in the morning room, a smaller, sunlit space that overlooked the snow-covered gardens. The room was less grand than the library, its faded chintz curtains and worn armchairs lending it an air of faded gentility. Beatrice entered promptly at noon, her black dress as severe as ever, her hands clasped tightly before her. Her sharp eyes met Poirot's with a mixture of wariness and defiance. "Mademoiselle Langley," Poirot began, his tone courteous but probing, "you have a keen ear, I understand. You overheard Monsieur Carstairs and Mademoiselle Tremaine last night. What precisely did you hear?" Beatrice's lips pursed, as if weighing her words. "I was passing the drawing-room around 10 o'clock. They were speaking quietly, but I caught fragments. Sylvia was laughing, saying something about a debt repaid." Rupert sounded agitated. "I didn't linger. It was none of my business." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A debt, you say? Most interesting. And where were you at 1:30, when the scream was heard?" "In my room, reading," Beatrice replied, her voice steady. "I told you before, Monsieur Poirot." "I heard the scream and came at once," Poirot nodded, making a note in his ever-present notebook. "And this book, what was it?" Beatrice hesitated, a faint flush rising to her cheeks. "A volume of sermons. I find them grounding indeed," Poirot said, his tone neutral, but his gaze piercing. "One last question, mademoiselle. The letter opener, the one used to kill Mademoiselle Tremaine, it was taken from the library. You are often in there, are you not, managing the estate's accounts?" Beatrice stiffened. "I am. But I had no reason to harm Sylvia. She was frivolous, perhaps, but harmless." Poirot dismissed her with a polite nod, but as she left, he turned to Hastings. "The sermons, Hastings." A curious choice for a woman so observant, so precise. "I wonder if her reading was as pious as she claims." Hastings frowned. "You think she's lying?" "But why? She's got no clear motive." "Motive," Poirot said, rising and pacing the room, "is not always clear at first. It hides like a shadow behind a curtain. Let us return to the scene of the crime. There is a detail that troubles me." They made their way back to Sylvia's room, now a familiar haunt of horror. Poirot knelt by the bedside table, his fingers brushing the edge where the clock stood, still frozen at 1:37 a.m. He examined the spilled water glass, now dry, and the rug beneath it. Then, with a sudden movement, he reached under the bed, his gloved hand emerging with a small, crumpled piece of paper. "Hastings, regardez!" Poirot unfolded the paper, revealing a torn fragment of a letter, written in a hurried feminine hand. The words were incomplete. "Must know the truth about before it's too late." The ink was smudged, the paper creased as if clutched tightly. "Good heavens," Hastings said, peering over Poirot's shoulder. "Sylvia's handwriting." "Perhaps," Poirot said, his voice low, "or perhaps not. The writing is hurried, but the pen, it is not the same as the one on her desk. See the ink, blue, not black. This is a clue, Hastings, a thread in the tapestry." He tucked the fragment into his pocket and moved to the window, inspecting the smudge on the sill once more. "This mark," he said, "it is not mud as I first thought. It is ash, cigarette ash perhaps." Yet Mademoiselle Tremaine did not smoke. According to Lady Eleanor Hastings's eyes widened. "Rupert smokes. That could tie him to the scene." "Or someone wishes us to think so," Poirot said, his moustache twitching. "The ash, the cigarette case, the whiskey glass, these are too convenient. But this paper, this is something the killer did not intend us to find." As they left the room, Poirot paused at the door, his gaze sweeping the corridor. "Hastings, the map of the house. Where is Monsieur Whitlock's room in relation to this one?" Hastings consulted the plan. "It's in the west wing, near Lady Eleanor's." "Quite a distance, and yet," Poirot said, "he was among the first to arrive after the scream. A man of his age, carrying a briefcase, moving so swiftly. It is remarkable." They returned to the library, where Poirot spread the house plan on the table, marking the positions of each guest's room. He drew a line from Sylvia's room to the servants' quarters, where faint muddy footprints had been found the previous night. "These footprints," he said, "they lead away from the crime, yet no one left the house. The killer, they are still here, and they are clever, but not cleverer than Poirot." Hastings felt a shiver, not from the cold, but from the realization that Poirot was closing in on the truth, one meticulous detail at a time. The fragment of the letter, the stopped clock, the ash on the sill, these were the keys, and Poirot was already turning them in the lock of Dunhaven Hall's secrets. Chapter 7. More lies surface. The afternoon at Dunhaven Hall was heavy with the weight of unspoken truths, the snow outside piling higher as if to entomb the house and its secrets. Hercule Poirot, undaunted by the oppressive atmosphere, continued his methodical investigation, his little grey cells sifting through the tangled web of alibis and clues. Captain Hastings, ever at his side, felt the tension rising, as if the very walls of the estate were closing in. Poirot had requested a second round of interviews, this time in the drawing room, where a grand piano stood silent, and a portrait of the late Sir Reginald Ashbourne gazed down with stern disapproval. The detective's demeanour remained calm, his moustache impeccably groomed, but his eyes burned with a quiet intensity that Hastings knew signalled progress. The crumpled letter fragment, the cigarette ash, and the stopped clock were pieces of a puzzle, and Poirot was determined to uncover more. First to be summoned was Clara Ashbourne, her delicate frame trembling as she sat on the edge of a velvet settee. Her auburn hair was slightly dishevelled, and her fingers twisted a lace handkerchief with nervous energy. Poirot regarded her with a gentle but piercing gaze. "Madame Ashbourne," he began, his voice soft, "you have confirmed your husband's alibi, that you were together in your room at 1:30 last night. Yet I observe you are troubled. Is there something you wish to share with Poirot?" Clara's eyes darted to the door, then back to Poirot. I don't know what you mean, Monsieur Poirot. Julian and I were asleep until the scream woke us." Poirot leaned forward, his hands folded neatly. "And yet, madame, your eyes, they tell a different story. They are the eyes of one who carries a secret. Tell me, what was your opinion of Mademoiselle Tremaine?" Clara's lips parted, then closed. She swallowed hard. Sylvia was charming in her way, but she had a knack for stirring trouble. She flirted with everyone, Julian, Rupert, even Dr. Hargreaves. It was harmless, I suppose, but it made things tense. "Tense?" Poirot repeated, his tone inviting more. "And this tension, it affected your husband, perhaps?" Clara's cheeks flushed. "Julian is a good man, but Sylvia's attention, it unsettled him. He said she was trying to manipulate him, something about money Sir Reginald owed her. But he swore there was nothing between them." Poirot made a note, his pen moving with deliberate care. "Money, you say? Most interesting. And where were you, madame, when you heard the scream?" "In our room," Clara insisted, her voice rising. "I swear it." But she hesitated, her eyes filling with tears. "I woke briefly around 1 o'clock. Julian wasn't in bed. I thought he'd gone to the bathroom, but he was gone longer than I expected. When he returned, he said he'd been checking the windows downstairs, worried about the storm." Poirot's moustache twitched. "And you believed him?" Clara nodded, but her hands betrayed her, shredding the handkerchief. Poirot dismissed her gently, his expression unreadable. Next came Dr. Hargreaves, his genial demeanour strained, his spectacles polished to a gleam. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, settling into a chair, "I hope you're making progress." "This business is dreadful for us all." "Indeed, Doctor," Poirot replied. "Let us speak of your conversation with Mademoiselle Tremaine after dinner. She mentioned a headache, oui? Did she seem distressed in any other way?" Hargreaves frowned, adjusting his glasses. "She was a bit agitated, perhaps. She mentioned a letter she'd received, something that upset her. I offered her a sedative, but she refused, saying she'd deal with it herself." "A letter," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing. "Did she say who sent it?" "No," Hargreaves replied. "She was vague, almost secretive. I didn't press her." Poirot nodded, jotting a note. "And your room, Doctor? It is near the library. Did you hear anything unusual before the scream?" Hargreaves shook his head. "Nothing. I was asleep by 11. The storm muffled most sounds." As Hargreaves left, Poirot turned to Hastings. "A letter, Hastings. The fragment we found. The truth about before it's too late. It is no coincidence. And Monsieur Ashbourne, absent from his bed at 1 o'clock. The lies, they multiply." The final interview was with Mr. Whitlock, the solicitor, whose pinched face and guarded manner seemed to tighten under Poirot's scrutiny. "Monsieur Whitlock," Poirot said, "your briefcase, it is always with you. What papers are so urgent that you carry them even in a house of mourning?" Whitlock's lips thinned. "Estate matters, as I've said. Sir Reginald's will is complex, and I was reviewing documents related to the inheritance." "And Mademoiselle Tremaine," Poirot pressed. "She was mentioned in this will, perhaps?" Whitlock hesitated, a rare crack in his composure. "She may have been. Sir Reginald was fond of her, and there were certain provisions. But I cannot discuss details. They're confidential." Poirot's smile was thin. "Confidential until they are not. Tell me, where were you at 1 o'clock before the scream?" "In my room, working," Whitlock said curtly. "I heard nothing until the scream." As Whitlock departed, Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. "Hastings, the threads tighten. A letter that upset Mademoiselle Tremaine, a debt to Monsieur Carstairs, an absent husband, and a will with secrets. The killer believed they could hide, but they have left footprints in the snow of their lies." Hastings, his mind racing, said, "Julian's absence from his room. That's damning, isn't it?" And Whitlock's evasiveness about the will. "Oui," Poirot said, "but we must not leap to conclusions. The truth, it is like a diamond, hard, multifaceted, and revealed only by careful cutting. We must dig deeper, mon ami." As they rose to leave the drawing-room, the portrait of Sir Reginald seemed to watch them, its eyes a silent witness to the secrets unravelling below. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The air in Dunhaven Hall seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour, as if the snow piling outside pressed not only on the roof, but on the hearts of its inhabitants. By late afternoon, the strain of Sylvia Tremaine's murder had frayed the nerves of the guests, their polite facades cracking under the relentless scrutiny of Hercule Poirot. Captain Hastings, observing the subtle shifts in demeanour, sensed that the case was nearing a critical juncture, a moment when the truth, like a dammed river, might burst forth. Poirot had chosen the conservatory for his next round of inquiries. A glass-walled room filled with wilted ferns and the faint scent of earth. The storm's dim light filtered through the frosted panes, casting a ghostly glow over the wicker furniture. Poirot sat at a small table, his notebook open, his eyes sharp as he prepared to push the suspects further. Hastings stood by a potted palm, watching as the detective's methodical approach began to unravel the house's secrets. Clara Ashbourne was summoned first, her eyes red-rimmed, her lace handkerchief now a tattered remnant. She sat, her hands trembling, and Poirot regarded her with a gentleness that belied his intent. "Madame Ashbourne," he said softly, "you have carried a burden since last night. Your husband's absence from your room at 1 o'clock, it troubles you, does it not?" Clara's breath hitched, and for a moment she seemed on the verge of collapse. "Monsieur Poirot," she whispered, I can't protect him any longer." Julian wasn't just checking the windows. "I heard him leave our room at 12:30, and he didn't return until nearly 1:30. I don't know where he went, but he was different when he came back." Agitated, his hands shaky, Poirot leaned forward, his voice steady. "And you did not ask him where he had been?" "I was afraid," Clara admitted, tears spilling over. "Sylvia was always flirting with him, and I knew he was hiding something about her. I thought perhaps he'd gone to her room, but murder," she broke off, sobbing. "I can't believe he'd do such a thing, but I can't lie any more." Poirot nodded, his expression grave. "Merci, madame. Your honesty, it is a step towards the truth." As Clara was escorted out, her sobs echoing in the corridor, Poirot turned to Hastings. "The crack in the dam, Hastings." Madame Ashbourne's confession shifts the tide. But we must be cautious. Her words implicate her husband, yet they may also protect another. Next came Julian Ashbourne, his face pale, his earlier confidence replaced by a hunted look. He sat heavily, his hands clenched. "Monsieur Poirot," he said before the detective could speak, "Clara told you, didn't she? About my absence?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "She did, monsieur. You were not in your room at 1 o'clock. Where were you?" Julian ran a hand through his hair, his voice low. "I couldn't sleep. Sylvia. She'd been pestering me all evening about money. She claimed Sir Reginald owed her a substantial sum from a deal years ago, a theatrical investment that went sour. She said she had proof, a letter, and threatened to expose it unless I paid her. I went to the library to see if I could find any record of this debt. I was there until just before the scream, and you saw no one?" Poirot asked, his eyes narrowing. "No one," Julian said. "The house was quiet except for the storm." Poirot made a note. "This letter Mademoiselle Tremaine mentioned, did you see it?" Julian shook his head. "She wouldn't show me. Said it was her leverage. I thought she was bluffing." Poirot dismissed him, his expression thoughtful. As Julian left, Hastings whispered, "He's got motive, Poirot." Sylvia was blackmailing him, and his revolver, could it be a red herring to distract from the letter opener? "Perhaps," Poirot said, tapping his pen. "But the letter? It is the key. The fragment we found. The truth about before it's too late. It suggests Mademoiselle Tremaine knew something dangerous. We must find the rest of that letter." The interviews continued, but it was Dr. Hargreaves who provided the next breakthrough. The physician, his usual geniality strained, sat twisting his spectacles in his hands. "Monsieur Poirot," he said, his voice unsteady, "there's something I didn't mention earlier. Sylvia, she confided in me after dinner. She said she was afraid someone in the house meant to harm her." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Afraid of whom, Doctor?" "She wouldn't say," Hargreaves replied, "but she mentioned a name, Reginald. She said, 'Reginald's secrets will ruin us all.' I thought she meant Sir Reginald, but she was so cryptic." Poirot leaned back, his fingers steepled. "And you did not think to share this before?" "I didn't want to cause a panic," Hargreaves said, his face flushing. "I thought she was being dramatic. She was an actress, after all." As Hargreaves left, Poirot turned to Hastings. "The net tightens, mon ami. A letter, a debt, a fear of harm, and Sir Reginald's name, the past of this house, it casts a long shadow." Hastings frowned. "But Sir Reginald's been dead for years. Could this be about his will? Or something deeper?" Poirot said. "We must search for the rest of that letter. It is the heart of this mystery." As the conservatory grew dim with the fading light, Poirot's resolve was unshaken. The emotional cracks in Clara and Hargreaves had revealed new threads, but the truth remained elusive, hidden in the shadows of Dunhaven Hall. Chapter 9. The Trap. The snow-laden dusk settled over Dunhaven Hall, casting long shadows that seemed to mirror the darkening mood within. Hercule Poirot, ever the master of timing, had decided that the moment was ripe to apply the psychological pressure that would force the killer's hand. The conservatory interviews had cracked open the facades of Clara Ashbourne and Dr. Hargreaves, revealing fragments of truth. But Poirot knew the true culprit still lurked among the suspects, cloaked in lies. Captain Hastings, sensing the detective's intent, felt a familiar thrill as Poirot prepared to set his trap. At 6 o'clock, Poirot summoned the entire household to the drawing-room. The guests filed in, their faces a mix of apprehension and defiance. Lady Eleanor stood by the fireplace, her silver hair catching the firelight, her expression one of strained composure. Julian Ashbourne sat beside Clara, his hand gripping hers tightly while she stared at the floor, her eyes still red from tears. Dr. Hargreaves polished his spectacles nervously, and Beatrice Langley sat ramrod straight, her lips pressed thin. Rupert Carstairs lounged in an armchair, his usual nonchalance strained, and Mr. Whitlock clutched his briefcase, his pinched face wary. Grayson, the butler, hovered near the door, his hands clasped as if in prayer. Poirot stood before the grand piano, his small frame commanding the room's attention. His moustache was impeccable, his eyes sharp as he surveyed the gathered suspects. "Mesdames et messieurs," he began, his voice clear and deliberate, "a terrible crime has been committed in this house. Mademoiselle Sylvia Tremaine lies dead, struck down by a letter-opener from this very estate. But the killer? They are not so clever as they believe. Poirot, he sees through the shadows of their deceit." A murmur rippled through the room, and Hastings noted the way Julian's grip on Clara's hand tightened. Poirot continued, his tone measured but relentless. "The clues, they are many. The stopped clock at 1:37, the cigarette ash on, the window-sill, the torn letter fragment speaking of the truth and too late. And now we have new revelations. A letter that frightened Mademoiselle Tremaine, a debt she claimed from Sir Reginald, and a fear that someone in this house meant her harm." Rupert shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting to the door. Poirot's gaze fixed on him. "Monsieur Carstairs, your cigarette case was found under the victim's bed, and a glass of whiskey, not water, was in her room. You deny being there, yet the evidence suggests otherwise." "I told you, I dropped the case earlier," Rupert protested, his voice rising. "I wasn't in her room last night." Poirot raised a hand, silencing him. "And you, Monsieur Ashbourne," he said, turning to Julian. "Your wife has revealed you were absent from your room at 1 o'clock, returning only moments before the scream. You claim you were in the library, searching for records of a debt Mademoiselle Tremaine held over you. Convenient, non?" Julian's face reddened. "I didn't kill her. She was trying to blackmail me. Yes, but I'd never—" "Enough," Poirot said sharply, his eyes sweeping the room. "There is more. Dr. Hargreaves, you spoke of Mademoiselle Tremaine's fear, her mention of Reginald's secrets. And you, Monsieur Whitlock, you guard your briefcase as if it holds the key to this mystery. Perhaps it does. Papers concerning Sir Reginald's will, papers that may name Mademoiselle Tremaine." Whitlock's grip on the briefcase tightened, but he said nothing. Lady Eleanor's voice cut through the tension. "Monsieur Poirot, what is the purpose of this? You accuse us all, yet offer no proof." Poirot smiled thinly. "The proof, madame, is in the contradictions. The killer has woven a web, but it is fraying. I propose a test, a reconstruction of the night's events. Tonight, at precisely 1:30, we shall gather in the East Wing. Each of you will return to your rooms, and we shall see what the shadows reveal when the clock strikes." A collective gasp filled the room. Clara's hand flew to her mouth, and Beatrice's eyes narrowed. "You mean to recreate the murder?" Dr. Hargreaves asked, his voice unsteady. "Not the murder, Doctor," Poirot said, "but the moment. The killer? They will betray themselves, for the human heart cannot resist the pressure of truth." As the group dispersed, their footsteps heavy with dread, Hastings pulled Poirot aside. "Are you sure about this, Poirot?" "It's a risky move, putting them all on edge like that." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Risk, Hastings, is the spark that ignites the truth. The killer believes they have outwitted Poirot, but tonight they will stumble. The letter fragment, the ash, the clock, these are not mere clues, but arrows pointing to the heart of the crime." Hastings glanced at the house plan, still spread out in the library, and noted the marked paths to Sylvia's room. "What if no one takes the bait?" he asked. "Then, mon ami," Poirot said, adjusting his tie, "we shall know the killer is more cunning than I thought." But I, Hercule Poirot, am never outwitted for long. As the clock ticked toward the appointed hour, Dunhaven Hall seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the trap to spring. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The clock in Dunhaven Hall's great hall struck 1:30, its chimes echoing through the silent corridors like a summons to judgment. The snow outside had ceased, leaving the estate in a stillness that felt both sacred and sinister. Hercule Poirot had orchestrated his trap with precision, and now the guests were gathered once more in the east wing, near Sylvia Tremane's room, their faces pale in the flickering light of the wall sconces. Captain Hastings stood by Poirot's side, his heart pounding as the detective prepared to unveil the truth. Poirot had instructed each guest to return to their rooms, as they claimed to have been at the time of the murder, and to reenact their movements following the scream. The group complied with reluctance, their eyes darting nervously as they dispersed. Poirot, however, remained in the corridor, his small frame a pillar of calm authority, his notebook in hand. Hastings watched as the detective's gaze swept over the scene, missing nothing. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, his voice carrying through the hall, "last night, Mademoiselle Sylvia Tremaine was murdered, and the killer sought to hide their crime with clever deceptions. But Hercule Poirot, he sees through the shadows. Let us reconstruct the night, and the truth, it will emerge." The reenactment began. Clara, trembling, stood by Julian's side, claiming they emerged together from their room. Julian, his face taut, nodded in agreement. Dr. Hargreaves shuffled from his room, spectacles askew, mimicking his arrival at the crime scene. Beatrice Langley appeared promptly, her expression unreadable, while Rupert Carstairs slouched against the wall, feigning his casual demeanour. Mr. Whitlock, briefcase in hand, emerged last, his steps measured. Grayson, the butler, lingered at the corridor's end, as if reluctant to join. Poirot paced slowly, his eyes flicking between the guests and the house plan Hastings held. "The scream came at 1:30, he said. "The clock in Mademoiselle Tremaine's room stopped at 1:37. Yet the scene, it was staged. The overturned chair, the spilled glass, the open window. Why?" He paused, turning to Rupert. "Monsieur Carstairs, your cigarette case and whiskey glass suggested your presence, yet you deny it. The ash on the sill, it was yours, oui?" Rupert flushed. "I told you, I wasn't there." Poirot raised a hand. "Patience. Let us consider another clue. The letter fragment, speaking of the truth and too late. It was written in blue ink, not the black ink of Mademoiselle Tremaine's pen. And Dr. Hargreaves, you spoke of her fear, of Reginald's secrets." Hargreaves nodded, his hands twisting. "She was terrified, but she wouldn't say more." Poirot's gaze shifted to Julian. "And you, Monsieur Ashbourne, absent from your room at 1 o'clock, searching for records of a debt Mademoiselle Tremaine claimed. A debt tied to Sir Reginald, perhaps." Julian's jaw clenched. "I didn't kill her." "I was in the library, oui," Poirot said, his voice softening, "but someone else was not." He turned abruptly to Mr. Whitlock, whose grip on his briefcase tightened. "Monsieur Whitlock, your papers, they concern Sir Reginald's will, no? A will that named Mademoiselle Tremaine as a beneficiary, perhaps?" Whitlock's face paled. I cannot disclose that." "You need not," Poirot said, his tone now sharp, "for I, Hercule Poirot, have pieced together the truth. The killer is among us, and their motive lies in the past. A secret tied to Sir Reginald's will. A secret Mademoiselle Tremaine discovered and sought to exploit. The room grew deathly silent. Poirot stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Beatrice Langley. "Mademoiselle Langley, you are precise, methodical, a keeper of accounts. But you are also a keeper of secrets. The letter fragment, it was in your handwriting, was it not? Blue ink, the same as your fountain pen." Beatrice's composure cracked, her hands trembling. "That's absurd! I had no reason to harm Sylvia." "But you did," Poirot said, relentless. "Sir Reginald's will left a substantial sum to Mademoiselle Tremaine, a sum that would diminish your inheritance as a cousin. You learned of her plan to reveal this, perhaps to blackmail others in the house. You wrote her a note, warning her to stay silent, but she refused. So you took the letter opener from the library, entered her room at 1:30, and struck her down." Beatrice gasped, her face ashen. "No, I was in my room, reading." Poirot shook his head. "The muddy footprints to the servants' quarters, they were yours, mademoiselle. You wore gloves to avoid leaving prints, but you could not hide the ash from your cigarette. Dropped in haste on the sill. The clock, you stopped it to confuse the timeline, but you forgot the rug. Undisturbed beneath the overturned chair. Your staging, it was meticulous but not perfect. The room erupted in murmurs. Lady Eleanor stepped forward, her voice shaking. "Beatrice, is this true?" Beatrice's shoulders slumped, her defiance crumbling. I couldn't let her ruin us," she whispered. "Sylvia found the will in the library, hidden in a book. She laughed, said she'd take everything. I only meant to scare her, but she lunged at me and I—" She broke off, sobbing. Poirot's expression softened, but his voice remained firm. "The truth, it is revealed. You killed Mademoiselle Tremaine to protect your inheritance, and you sought to blame Monsieur Carstairs with your clever deceptions." As Grayson led Beatrice away, the guests stood in stunned silence. Hastings, his mind reeling, turned to Poirot. "How did you know it was her?" "The little grey cells, Hastings," Poirot said, tapping his temple. "The letter, the ash, the clock, they told the story. And Mademoiselle Langley's precision, it was her undoing. The storm had passed, but the chill of truth lingered in Dunhaven Hall." Chapter 11. The Reflection. The revelation of Beatrice Langley's guilt hung over Dunhaven Hall like a pall, even as the snow outside began to melt under a tentative morning sun. The guests, shaken by the unmasking of the killer among them, had retreated to their rooms, leaving the great house steeped in a heavy silence. Hercule Poirot, his work nearly done, sat in the library with Captain Hastings, the fire casting a warm glow over the oak-panelled walls. The detective's notebook lay closed on the table, its pages filled with the meticulous notes that had unravelled the mystery of Sylvia Tremaine's murder. Hastings, still reeling from the dramatic confrontation in the East Wing, stirred his tea absently. "I must say, Poirot," he began, his voice tinged with admiration, "you were brilliant last night. The way you pieced it all together, the letter, the ash, the clock, it was like watching a puzzle come to life." Poirot's moustache twitched with a faint smile, but his green eyes were thoughtful, almost sombre. "Merci, mon ami," he said, leaning back in his chair. "But the solving of a crime, it is not always a cause for celebration. The human heart, it is a complex thing, driven to such acts by fear and greed. Mademoiselle Langley, she was not a monster, but a woman who saw her world crumbling and acted in desperation." Hastings nodded, his brow furrowing. "Still, it's chilling to think she was so calm, so precise, all while planning to frame Rupert." That cigarette case and whiskey glass. She nearly had us all fooled. Oui, Poirot said, his fingers steepled. The red herrings, they were clever, but they lacked the subtlety of truth. The letter fragment in her handwriting, the ash from her cigarette, the stopped clock, these were the true voices of the crime, speaking to Poirot's little grey cells. He rose, adjusting his tie with habitual precision, and walked to the window, gazing out at the snow-covered moors. This house, Hastings, it is a microcosm of humanity. The secrets, the jealousies, the hidden motives, they fester until they erupt. Mademoiselle Tremaine, she was a catalyst, stirring the pot with her knowledge of Sir Reginald's will. But it was Mademoiselle Langley's fear of losing her inheritance that drove the fatal blow. Hastings joined him at the window, the cold glass reflecting their faces. "What happens now?" Beatrice has confessed, but the police are still hours away. "The constable will arrive soon," Poirot said, "and Mademoiselle Langley will face justice. But for us, our work is done. The truth, it is revealed, and Dunhaven Hall may begin to heal." A knock at the door interrupted them. Lady Eleanor entered, her face pale but composed, her silver hair neatly pinned. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, her voice steady, "I owe you a debt of gratitude. You have brought clarity to this tragedy, though it pains me to know Beatrice was responsible." Poirot bowed slightly. "Madame, it is the duty of Hercule Poirot to seek the truth, however painful. Your house, it has carried many secrets, but now they are laid bare." Lady Eleanor's eyes glistened, but she held her composure. "Sylvia's presence was a mistake. I see that now. Her connection to my late husband, it stirred old wounds. I should have foreseen the consequences." Poirot's expression softened. "The past, madame, it is a heavy burden, but you are not to blame for the actions of others." She nodded, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes, and left the room. Hastings watched her go, then turned to Poirot. "You're awfully philosophical today, old chap. What's next for you? Back to York for a well-earned rest?" Poirot chuckled softly. "Rest, Hastings? No, the little grey cells, they do not rest. There are always mysteries, always puzzles to solve. But for now, I shall enjoy a cup of tisane and the quiet of this moment." As they gathered their things to depart, the library clock chimed softly, marking the passage of time. Poirot paused, his hand on the door. "The world, it moves forward, Hastings, but the human heart, it remains the same, full of passion, full of flaws. It is why I, Poirot, will never lack for work." With that, he stepped into the hall, his small figure a beacon of order in the chaos of Dunhaven Hall. Hastings followed, knowing that wherever Poirot went, the truth would never be far behind. Chapter 12. The unseen thread. The morning sun, though weak, had begun to thaw the snow that encased Dunhaven Hall. And with it, the oppressive weight of Sylvia Tremaine's murder seemed to lift, if only slightly. The household, however, remained in a state of uneasy quiet, as if the walls themselves were still absorbing the shock of Beatrice Langley's confession. Hercule Poirot, ever vigilant, had not yet declared the case fully closed. His little grey cells, as Captain Hastings well knew, were never content until every loose thread was neatly tied. In the library, where Poirot and Hastings had retreated after Lady Eleanor's departure, the detective sat at the oak table, his notebook open once more. His pen tapped rhythmically against the page, a sign that something still troubled him. Hastings, leaning against a bookcase, watched his friend with growing curiosity. "Poirot," Hastings ventured, "Beatrice confessed." "The clues all fit," Her handwriting on the letter fragment, the cigarette ash, the stopped clock. What's nagging at you? Surely the case is solved. Poirot's eyes gleamed, a spark of mischief beneath his serious demeanour. Mon cher Hastings, you are, as always, eager for the finish line. But Poirot, he does not rest until every detail is accounted for. There is a thread, an unseen thread that does not yet align. Hastings frowned. What thread? Beatrice admitted she killed Sylvia to protect her inheritance. The motive, the means, it all makes sense. Poirot rose, pacing slowly before the fire. Oui, it makes sense, but it is too tidy. The letter fragment, it spoke of the truth, and too late. Why would Mademoiselle Langley write such a note to warn her victim, only to kill her hours later? And the will, why was it hidden in a book, as she claimed Sylvia found it? These questions, they nag at Poirot. He stopped, his gaze fixed on the portrait of Sir Reginald Ashbourne above the mantel. There is something more, Hastings. A secret deeper than a disputed inheritance. We must examine the library again. The two made their way to the shelves, where Poirot began inspecting the books with meticulous care. He pulled down volume after volume, flipping through pages, his fingers tracing spines as if seeking a hidden message. Hastings, assisting, felt a growing sense of unease. What are we looking for, exactly? A document, Poirot said, his voice low. The will, or something related? Mademoiselle Tremaine found it here, according to Mademoiselle Langley. But where? After nearly an hour, Poirot paused at a worn copy of the Pickwick Papers, its binding slightly askew. He opened it, and a folded paper slipped out, falling to the floor. Hastings retrieved it, his breath catching as he saw the official seal of a solicitor's office. Good Lord, Poirot, is this it? Poirot unfolded the document, his eyes scanning the text. It is not the will itself, but a codicil, dated a year before Sir Reginald's death. Regardez, Hastings, it names Sylvia Tremaine as the beneficiary of a trust, to be paid only if she remained silent about a certain matter. A matter described only as the indiscretion of 1905. Hastings's eyes widened. The indiscretion of 1905? What does that mean? Poirot's moustache twitched. It means, mon ami, that Sir Reginald had a secret, one Mademoiselle Tremaine knew and used to her advantage. This codicil was her leverage, but someone else in this house knew of it and wished to keep it buried. They returned to the table, where Poirot spread out the house plan alongside the codicil. Beatrice Langley killed to protect her inheritance, oui, but I suspect she was also protecting another. Someone who stood to lose more if this indiscretion came to light. Hastings's mind raced. Lady Eleanor? She's the head of the family, and Sylvia's presence seemed to unsettle her. Perhaps, Poirot said, but we must also consider Monsieur Whitlock. His briefcase, his evasiveness about the will, he knows more than he has revealed. As if summoned by the mention of his name, Whitlock appeared at the library door, his face pale, his briefcase clutched tightly. Monsieur Poirot, he said, his voice strained, I overheard you speaking of the codicil. I must speak. Poirot's eyes narrowed. Speak, monsieur. The truth. It is the only path now. Whitlock sank into a chair, his shoulders slumping. The codicil. I drafted it for Sir Reginald. The indiscretion of 1905 was an affair, one that produced a child. Sylvia was that child's mother. Sir Reginald provided for her in secret, but she grew greedy, demanding more. I tried to warn her to stay silent, but she wouldn't listen. Hastings gasped. Sylvia had a child with Sir Reginald? Whitlock nodded. The child was given up, raised elsewhere. Beatrice found the codicil last week and confronted me. She was furious. Her inheritance was already diminished, and Sylvia's demands threatened to ruin the family's reputation. I didn't know she'd kill her. Poirot's expression was grave. And you kept this secret, even as Mademoiselle Langley confessed. I was ashamed, Whitlock said, his voice breaking. I failed Sir Reginald by letting this come to light. Poirot closed his notebook. The thread, it is tied. Beatrice killed to protect both her inheritance and the Ashbourne name. But the true secret was Sylvia's connection to Sir Reginald, a tragedy born of greed and shame. As Whitlock left, head bowed, Hastings turned to Poirot. Will you tell the others? No, Poirot said softly. The police will handle Mademoiselle Langley. The codicil, it will remain with Lady Eleanor, for her to decide its fate. Poirot, he seeks only the truth, not to stir more pain. The library grew quiet, the fire crackling softly as the weight of the final secret settled over Dunhaven Hall. Chapter 13. The Echoes of the Past. The revelation of Sylvia Tremane's connection to Sir Reginald Ashbourne had cast a new shadow over Dunhaven Hall, one that lingered even as the snow began to recede under the tentative warmth of the morning sun. The house, though still grand in its weathered opulence, felt hollow, its secrets now exposed like the bones of an ancient ruin. Hercule Poirot, his work in uncovering the truth nearly complete, sat once more in the library with Captain Hastings, his demeanour a blend of satisfaction and melancholy. The fire in the grate had burned low, its embers glowing faintly as Poirot sipped a cup of tisane, his eyes distant. Hastings, seated across from him, fidgeted with his tie, still grappling with the weight of Mr. Whitlock's confession. Poirot, he said, breaking the silence. This business about Sylvia being the mother of Sir Reginald's child. It's extraordinary. Do you think Lady Eleanor knew? Poirot set down his cup, his fingers brushing the edge of his notebook. It is likely, mon ami. Lady Eleanor, she is a woman of great perception, and the secrets of her husband, they would not escape her entirely. But to know and to acknowledge, these are different things. She chose silence to protect the Ashbourne name. Hastings nodded, his brow furrowing. And Beatrice, did she know about the child, or was it just the codicil that drove her to murder? Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his mind still at work. Mademoiselle Langley knew of the codicil, oui, and its threat to her inheritance. But I suspect she also learned of the child, perhaps through Sylvia's careless words. The fear of scandal, combined with the loss of wealth, it was too much for her. She acted to bury both the truth and Mademoiselle Tremaine. The library door creaked open, and Dr. Hargreaves entered, his round face etched with exhaustion. Monsieur Poirot, he said, his voice low, I've just spoken with Lady Eleanor. She's asked me to ensure Beatrice is cared for until the police arrive. But I feel I must ask, how did you know it was Beatrice? There were so many suspects, Poirot's eyes gleamed with quiet pride. The little grey cells, Doctor. They see what others overlook. The letter fragment, written in blue ink, matched Mademoiselle Langley's pen. The cigarette ash on the sill, it was from her brand, not Monsieur Carstairs'. The stopped clock, a deliberate act to confuse the timeline, was too precise for a moment of panic. These details, they pointed to a mind both meticulous and desperate. Hargreaves shook his head, polishing his spectacles absently. Poor Beatrice. She was always so controlled. To think she could do such a thing, the human heart, Poirot said softly. "It is capable of great deeds and great darkness." Mademoiselle Langley chose the latter, but her motive, it was rooted in fear, a fear of losing all she held dear. As Hargreaves left, Hastings leaned forward. "What about the child, Poirot? Sylvia's child, I mean. Is there any chance of finding them?" Poirot's expression grew solemn. "The codicil, it does not name the child, and Monsieur Whitlock claims ignorance of their fate." "It is a thread that may remain untied, Hastings. Some secrets, they belong to the past." The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a motor car crunching on the gravel drive. Hastings peered out the window to see a police van, its lights cutting through the thinning snow. "The constable's here at last," he said. "They'll take Beatrice away." "Oui," Poirot said, rising. "And with her, the final act of this tragedy will close. But first I must speak with Lady Eleanor once more." They found her in the drawing-room, standing before the portrait of Sir Reginald. Her silver hair was immaculate, but her eyes betrayed a weariness that no amount of dignity could mask. "Monsieur Poirot," she said, turning to him, "you have done us a great service, though it has come at a cost." "Beatrice, I never imagined she could harbour such darkness." Poirot bowed slightly. "Madame, the darkness, it is in us all, but it is the choices we make that define us. You will decide what to do with the codicil, I trust?" Lady Eleanor's lips tightened. "It will be destroyed. The Ashbourne name has suffered enough, and the child, wherever they are, deserves peace." Poirot nodded, his expression unreadable. A wise choice, perhaps. "The past, it is a heavy burden, but it need not haunt the future." As they left the drawing-room, the police entered, their heavy boots echoing in the great hall. Beatrice, pale but composed, was led away, her hands bound, her eyes fixed on the floor. The other guests watched in silence, their faces a mix of relief and sorrow. Hastings turned to Poirot. "It's over then, but it feels unfinished somehow." Poirot's gaze lingered on the departing police van. "The case, it is solved, Hastings." But the echoes of the past, they linger. For Poirot, it is enough to have brought light to the darkness. With that, he adjusted his coat and stepped toward the door, ready to leave Dunhaven Hall and its secrets behind. Chapter 14. The Final Pieces. The departure of the police van, carrying Beatrice Langley to face justice, left Dunhaven Hall in a state of uneasy calm. The snow, now melting into slush under a pale afternoon sun, mirrored the slow unravelling of the estate's oppressive atmosphere. Yet Hercule Poirot, ever meticulous, lingered in the great hall, his sharp eyes scanning the faces of the remaining guests as they gathered to bid him farewell. Captain Hastings, standing beside him, sensed that the detective's mind was still at work, piecing together the final fragments of the mystery. The guests, though relieved that the killer had been unmasked, moved with the hesitancy of those who had glimpsed the darkness within their own circle. Lady Eleanor stood at the head of the group, her regal bearing intact but softened by a new vulnerability. Julian and Clara Ashbourne stood close, their hands clasped, their faces etched with exhaustion. Dr. Hargreaves, his spectacles gleaming, offered a weary nod, while Rupert Carstairs, his usual bravado subdued, leaned against a pillar. Mr. Whitlock, his briefcase still in hand, looked as if he carried the weight of the codicil's secrets on his shoulders. Poirot, his overcoat neatly buttoned, addressed the group with his characteristic precision. "Mesdames et messieurs," he said, his voice clear in the cavernous hall, "the tragedy of Mademoiselle Sylvia Tremaine has been resolved, and the guilty party will face the consequences. But before Poirot departs, there are matters yet to clarify. small pieces that complete the puzzle. Lady Eleanor raised an eyebrow, her voice steady but curious. "What more is there, Monsieur Poirot?" Beatrice confessed, and the codicil explained her motive. "Surely all is settled." Poirot's moustache twitched, a sign of his relentless pursuit of order. "Almost, madam. But the little grey cells, they demand completeness. There is the matter of the letter fragment, the one found under Mademoiselle Tremaine's bed. Its words, the truth about before it's too late. They were in Mademoiselle Langley's hand, oui. But why did she write it? A warning, perhaps, but to whom, and for what purpose?" He turned to Whitlock, whose grip on his briefcase tightened. "Monsieur Whitlock, you drafted the codicil for Sir Reginald, and you knew of Mademoiselle Tremaine's connection to the child. Did you also know of Mademoiselle Langley's discovery of this document?" Whitlock's face paled, his voice low. "I suspected she'd found it. She came to me last week, asking questions about the estate's finances. I didn't tell her about the child, but she must have pieced it together. I warned her to leave it alone, but she was obsessed with protecting the family's legacy." Poirot nodded, his eyes narrowing, and this warning, it was not enough. Mademoiselle Langley wrote the note to Mademoiselle Tremaine, hoping to silence her threats of blackmail. But when Sylvia refused, Beatrice acted. The letter fragment, it was torn in haste, left behind in the struggle. Hastings, listening intently, interjected, "But why leave the note at all? Why not destroy it?" Poirot's gaze softened. "The human heart, Hastings, it is not always logical." "Mademoiselle Langley," she wrote in a moment of panic, hoping to intimidate. "When she killed, she meant to retrieve the note, but the scream, it came too soon, and she fled, leaving the fragment behind." Rupert Carstairs, his voice rough, spoke up. "So I was just a scapegoat. The cigarette case, the whiskey glass, Beatrice set me up." "Oui," Poirot said, turning to him. "Your reputation, Monsieur Carstairs. It made you the perfect distraction. The ash on the sill, it was from Mademoiselle Langley's cigarette, but placed to suggest your presence. The glass, it was taken from your room earlier that day. She knew you were a smoker, a drinker, a man easily suspected." Rupert's jaw clenched, but he said nothing, his eyes dark with resentment. Clara, her voice trembling, asked, "And the child? Will anyone ever know who they are?" Poirot's expression grew solemn. "That, madame, is a secret lost to time, unless Lady Eleanor chooses to pursue it. The codicil, it is in her hands now." Lady Eleanor's lips tightened, but she nodded. "It will remain private." The Ashbourne family has endured enough scandal. Poirot inclined his head. "A wise decision, madame. The past it is best left to rest, unless it seeks to disturb the present." As the guests began to disperse, their farewells subdued, Hastings pulled Poirot aside. "You've tied up every loose end, Poirot. The note, the codicil, the frame-up, it's all clear now. But how do you do it? How do you see what we all miss?" Poirot smiled faintly, adjusting his hat. "It is the method, Hastings. The observation of the small things, the ink, the ash, the silence between words. The truth, it hides in plain sight, but only for those who look with care." With that, he stepped toward the waiting motor car, the slush crunching under his polished shoes. Dunhaven Hall loomed behind them, its secrets laid bare, its wounds beginning to heal. Hastings followed, knowing that Poirot's work, like the snow, would soon be a memory. But its impact would linger long in the hearts of those who remained. Chapter 15. The Departure. The afternoon light filtered through the mullioned windows of Dunhaven Hall. casting elongated shadows across the great hall as Hercule Poirot prepared to take his leave. The estate, once a fortress of secrets and suspicions, now seemed subdued, its inhabitants moving with the quiet deliberation of those emerging from a long storm. Captain Hastings, gathering his coat and gloves, felt a mixture of relief and melancholy. The thrill of the case had passed, leaving behind the sobering reality of human frailty. Poirot stood by the front door, his patent leather shoes gleaming, his overcoat draped neatly over his arm. He surveyed the gathered guests one last time, his keen eyes noting the subtle changes in their postures. Lady Eleanor's chin held a fraction higher. Julian and Clara standing closer together. Dr. Hargreaves's spectacles polished to a new shine. Rupert Carstairs' smirk softened by humility. And Mr. Whitlock's briefcase, at last, set down beside him. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot said, his voice resonant in the echoing space, "the affair of Dunhaven Hall is concluded. The truth, it has been brought to light, and justice will follow its course. Mademoiselle Beatrice Langley, she will answer for her crime, driven as it was by the shadows of greed and fear. But remember, the human soul, it is a delicate instrument, easily tipped by the weight of secrets." Lady Eleanor stepped forward, her silver hair catching the light like a crown. "Monsieur Poirot, we cannot thank you enough. You have restored order to our chaos, though the cost has been great. Dunhaven will not forget your service." Poirot bowed, his manner impeccable. "Madame, it is the duty of Hercule Poirot to seek the symmetry of truth. Your house, it will heal, as all wounds do with time. Guard your secrets wisely, for they are the double-edged swords of the heart." Julian Ashbourne, his arm around Clara, offered a nod. "We owe you our peace of mind, monsieur. Without you, suspicion would have torn us apart." Clara's voice, soft but steady, added, "Yes, thank you." "We can begin anew now." Dr. Hargreaves cleared his throat, his genial nature reasserting itself. "A remarkable feat, Poirot. Your methods, they're a lesson in observation. I shall think of your little grey cells whenever I examine a patient." Poirot's moustache twitched with amusement. "The body and the mind, doctor, they both reveal their ailments to those who listen carefully." Rupert Carstairs, pushing off from the pillar, extended a hand. "I thought you had me pegged for it, old chap." Glad to be wrong for once, Poirot shook his hand firmly. "Monsieur Carstairs, the obvious path, it is often the deceptive one. Learn from this. Charm, it is a mask, but truth sees through it." Finally, Mr. Whitlock approached, his face lined with the strain of revelations. "Monsieur Poirot, the codicil, I should have come forward sooner." My silence prolonged the pain. Poirot's gaze was kind but firm. "Silence, monsieur. It is a choice, and choices have consequences. But you spoke when it mattered. That is the mark of character." As the farewells concluded, Grayson, the butler, opened the heavy oak door, revealing the thawing landscape beyond. The snow-covered moors stretched out, dotted with patches of emerging green, a symbol of renewal. Poirot donned his coat, adjusting the collar with precision, and turned to Hastings. "Come, mon ami, the motor car awaits." York calls, with its comforts and its quiet. Hastings followed, pausing at the threshold to glance back at the hall. "It's been quite the adventure, Poirot. Dunhaven Hall won't be the same now," Poirot agreed, stepping into the crisp air. "But change, it is the only constant. The secrets of yesterday pave the way for the mysteries of tomorrow." The motor car, its engine purring softly, carried them down the gravel drive, away from the estate. Hastings watched Dunhaven Hall recede in the mirror, its towers silhouetted against the sky. "What do you make of it all, Poirot?" The affair, the child, the hidden will, was it worth the unravelling? Poirot leaned back in his seat, his hands folded neatly in his lap. "Worth, Hastings. The truth, it is always worth the pursuit. For in its light, we see not only the darkness of others, but our own. Sir Reginald's indiscretion, Sylvia's greed, Beatrice's desperation. They are echoes of the human condition. We all carry secrets, mon ami, but it is how we confront them that defines us." Hastings nodded, gazing out at the passing countryside. And the child? Will they ever know their heritage? Poirot's expression grew thoughtful. Perhaps not. Some truths they are best left unspoken, lest they cause more harm than healing. Lady Eleanor, she will decide, and Poirot, he respects that choice. The journey to York passed in companionable silence, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional rustle of Poirot's notebook as he jotted final thoughts. Upon arrival at the hotel, Poirot paused at the entrance, his gaze sweeping the bustling street. "Ah, civilization," he said with a sigh of contentment. "A hot tisane, a comfortable chair. These are the rewards of the detective." Hastings smiled. "Until the next mystery calls." Poirot chuckled softly. "Oui, Hastings, until then. For the world, it is full of puzzles, and I, Hercule Poirot, am ever ready to solve them." As they entered the hotel, the door closing behind them, Dunhaven Hall faded into memory. A chapter closed, but the book of life turned to a new page, filled with the promise of unforeseen twists and the enduring quest for truth.